brain's drawing your hand away from the flames or whatever it is that is the noxious stimulus. So, it's come down a bit, is it? But anyway, this is what I learned really from the Neuro-Orthopaedic Institute in Australia, that actually information does travel to the brain, and there are little receptors in our tissues that take information about noxious stimuli, whether it's mechanical, chemical or thermal, and all that goes to the brain. But the brain is also taking in lots of other information. It's taking in information about the environment we're in. It's matching it against old experiences that we've had. There are chemical changes, there are genetic changes, loads of information is feeding into the decision that the brain makes as to whether to give you a pain experience or not. And this is really interesting. So, if you want to just try this experiment now, if you just get hold of your earlobe and pinch as hard as you can. Okay, that's painful, right? You can let go. But you won't have damaged your ears. There won't be any tissue damage. So what will have happened is we have a buffer zone, and we can, whether we're running a marathon or pinching our ears or going near something hot, all that information's going to the brain, and there's a buffer zone there, and usually the brain will send you pain before you experience an injury. And this is that buffer zone is what athletes learn they call that the pain barrier. That's what they learn to go through their pain barrier, to access that extra capacity. And also we can access that extra capacity. You can't really see it, but the top bit is about a teenager who lifted a truck off her father who was trapped underneath. So we all have this extra capacity that we can access in extremis. We can also have pain without any tissue damage. Now this is an amazing story. This was a young builder in Leicester who some years ago jumped off the scaffolding and landed, and when he looked down he'd got a nail coming up through his boot. So he was rushed to hospital in extreme pain, and he was given very strong opiates, fentanyl and midazolam, to calm him down before they could even touch the nail, let alone remove it. When they removed the nail, they found that actually he hadn't got any damage in his foot at all. The nail had passed between some toes, and the brain had looked at everything. I mean, the brain knew he was in a dangerous place. Building sites are dangerous, right? You have to wear hats. It's where lots of industrial accidents happen. We know building sites are dangerous. He looked down and he saw the nail. That's a pretty strong stimulus to the brain. There's a nail through my boot. And then there would be the reaction of all his colleagues, blue lights, nurses, the whole gubbins really. And so that's, an amazing story really. But it's also possible to have tissue damage and not have pain. And you've probably all heard stories about soldiers who didn't realise that they had a big injury until they got somewhere safe, and then they realised that a big lump of them is missing somewhere. And my son's girlfriend is a radiographer, and she came home only this week and said she'd had 2 young guys in who had been stabbed the night before, but hadn't realised until the next day that they'd got stab wounds. And that's because when your brain's, making this calculation, it's taking into account whether it's useful for you to have pain. And if the situation you're in is really dangerous, then it's not useful to slow you down with pain in your stab wound or whatever else is going on. So, and this is truly scary. Well, I found it scary anyway. This is a table, and this is people that don't have any pain, and it's a table about the kind of spinal damage that people have got by age. When I saw this, I'm in the 60 category. I almost took to my bed like Charlie Snake's grandparents, in a chocolate factory. I'm at 88% likelihood of disc degeneration, disc spinal loss, 86%. scary stuff. But like everybody else in this table, I have no pain. So pain is weird. We can have pain with no tissue damage, and that includes pain that goes on, chronic pain, long after the tissue damage is healed. And we can have tissue damage with no pain. What I forgot to add is we can have pain in a part of our body that doesn't even exist. So an amputated body part, or sometimes people that are born without limbs can have pain, even in a body part they've never had. And it's these other dimensions, the psychological and the social, that account for the weirdness of our pain, our beliefs, our anxieties, our previous experiences. Our brain evaluates all these before deciding whether it's useful for us to have a pain experience or not. But in chronic pain, look what happens to the buffer. The point at which the brain sends you a message of pain, the brain knows you're anxious about a body part, and that buffer zone just increases. And in extreme cases, people can develop something called anhedonia, where even really benign stimuluses like blowing on skin can cause pain. So with Olliers and Mafucci's, this is a real problem, because you've got ongoing chronic pain that you need to learn to live with, but you also have to be alert to any new pains that come along, any changes in the character of your pain or new locations of pains. And as has been discussed this morning, those always need checking out in case there's been any malignant transformation. But it's how you juggle those, really. You can't see him, that's my hero, one of my heroes, Ramachandran. He's the guy that developed the mirror box for phantom limb pain. But he says pain is an opinion. So if pain is an opinion, can we get pain to change its mind? Well, the answer is you can, but it's not easy. And the top word, oh, you can see it over there, connection matters. So, connection, social relationships are so important when it comes to pain, because we know that physical pain and social pain are processed by the same areas in the brain. So if one is worse, they can ladder on each other. Sorry, that's what I want to say. Oh yeah. So social isolation makes the pain worse, and evolutionary psychologists put this down to the fact that when we were all hunter-gatherers, if we went out hunting or gathering and we had an accident, then our tribe members would notice that we were missing and they'd come and look for us. So it really matters to us that the people around us are supportive. And I know, Tor paid huge tribute, and the support of your family is, the pillars that support you. So if you're coping with chronic pain, you have to make sure those pillars are in place. You have to prioritise time and effort to going out making those social connections, even when you might not feel like it, or encourage your kids to make those the time and the priority for that. Oh, I can't see the picture on this one either. Oh well. But mindfulness meditation, there was a huge, big meta-analysis done in 2014. And they looked at loads and loads of research, and it showed, unequivocally really, that mindfulness meditation reduces anxiety, it reduces depression, it reduces pain, and it's really, really, worth doing. And in mindfulness meditation, we just learn to be with ourselves really, and accept what's our moment-to-moment experience. We slow down, we come to the breath, we use the breath as our anchor. And we just notice what's going on for us, and we bring our minds back to the breath. And then we may notice that there are moments when we don't have pain, moments that maybe we hadn't noticed before, because all the thoughts about having pain, the thoughts about the pain experiences we've had in the past, and the fear about pain experiences in the future can all crowd into the present moment and make the present moment continuously painful. So learning to slow down and actually come back into the body, which is something that's very hard to do if you have pain in your body. Chronic pain sufferers tend to live in their heads, which is why thoughts are so powerful. So if you can come back to your body with some gentleness and compassion and learn to be with what's going on within your body with that compassion, really, and kindness, then that can be enormously helpful. So this is the Salata Sutta. It's the Buddhist conception of pain, and mindfulness meditation, as you may or may not know, is based on Buddhist understandings of pain. So, I don't know if it's all showing on that one. So the Salata Sutta says, when the uninstructed ordinary person is touched by a painful bodily feeling, he worries, grieves, laments, weeps, and is distraught. It is as if the man were pierced by two darts, a mental and a physical dart. Whereas in the case of the well-taught disciple, when he is touched by a painful feeling, he will not be distraught. It is one kind of feeling, a bodily one, but not a mental one. It is as if a man were pierced by the first dart, but not the second. So mindfulness meditation seems to work by decoupling those darts, so you can put one of them aside. And amazingly, just 8 weeks of mindfulness meditation, if you had an MRI at the beginning, and 8 weeks later, you would see structures in some of the big, important elements of the brain, like the amygdala tends to be smaller, and the amygdala is like the alarm centre of the brain. So very often in chronic pain, your whole system can become like a house alarm that will go off when a bird lands on the roof. So we're trying to bring all that down and get some normal sensation going again. But the changes are most profound and most stable in people that have been meditating for a long time. And the other thing that's really important is pacing, because if you have chronic pain, then that's immensely frustrating. It stops you doing things, and then when you have a good day, the temptation is to try and make hay while the sun shines, to go crazy and do everything you've been wanting to do. And that's almost inevitably followed by a bad day. And you get on this merry-go-round, and these loops tend to tighten and get smaller. And then you can go down the funnel of, increasing pain and depression. This is Vidyamala Birch, one of my teachers, and she teaches mindfulness for people with chronic pain. And she's a chronic pain sufferer herself. She's had 2 spinal injuries, and she's quite amazing. And one of the things that both the mindfulness meditation movement and the Neuro-Orthopedic Institute in Australia agree on is that movement is absolutely key for getting back, for reducing pain. It's very reassuring to the brain. But you have to be very careful in chronic pain. You can't overdo it. And Vidyamala recommends keeping an activity diary and finding out how long you can do any particular activity before it gives you pain. Reducing that by 20%, so it's quite a palaver doing this. You reduce it by 20%, and then you learn to do your activities within timescales that your body can manage, and then you very, very slowly open those out again. When I last saw Vidyamala, which was in the summer, she had a little timer with her all the time, and it went off every 20 minutes. So if she was standing, she sat, and if she was sitting, she stood. But she didn't do anything for longer than 20 minutes. She didn't take any position. And she said that, well, she's managing to bring down her painkillers to levels that her clinicians can't quite believe with the injuries that she's got. So that's really quite impressive. And especially when we think that even fake movement, like using mirrors or guided imagery, can help with pain as well. So why movement should be quite so profound in reducing pain. Don't know really if we go into that, but I don't think anybody quite understands that. So all these things are really to sort of free you up for the treasure of pleasure, because you know everything that's coming in, you've got threats on the one hand and safety on the other, and pleasure is telling you that you're safe. You know, when you're feeling pleasure, when you're relaxed, it's hard for you to feel pain. And I don't know if you can't see it on this one, but underneath it says mindful, full mind, or mindful. If your mind is full of your pain, everything else you've got to do, and your jobs, etc., responsibilities, then you're missing the sun, you're missing the dog, you're missing everything. So just trying to be in the moment and experiencing what you're experiencing and being with who you're with is the way to go, really. So, there has been a revolution really in understanding pain. And one of the things I want you to understand is, although I've talked about the importance of the brain in pain, both in creating it and relieving it, I'm not saying pain's all in your head, far from it. Pain is always, always, always real. No matter what's causing it, it's always real. But pain is not a reliable sign of tissue damage. So the more something hurts doesn't mean the more damaged it is. And that's an important understanding. Chronic pain, or any pain, but chronic pain in particular is complex. Everybody has their own particular witch's brew of experiences and genetic input. There was an article in the New Scientist a couple of years ago, and in Japan they twinned the smell of cherry blossom with electric shocks, so that in the end these poor little mice only had to smell cherry blossom and they would exhibit an anxiety response that could be measured. Now the children of these mice, and even the grandchildren of these mice, only had to smell cherry blossom to exhibit the same response, even though they'd never been given an electric shock. So our epigenetic inheritance, which can be changed by our experience, is not the same as our genetic experience. This is on the surface of the gene. That's profoundly important in how we behave in painful situations. That's why we all have different responses to pain. So some people have naturally high pain buffers and other people naturally low, and you've probably inherited that. But we can learn to change it. And if you learn to change it early on in life, then that's a change you're going to give to your children when you have them. And that's why I think it's so wonderful that they're teaching mindfulness in schools. And if you've got children with Ollies or Mafuchis, if they don't teach mindfulness in the school that they're at, I'd be finding them a mindfulness class, because it is that valuable. I think that's it really. So, anyone got any questions or any comment they'd like to make at all?
Are there any good apps for mindfulness? They're quite popular these days. Would you recommend them, and are there any good ones?
There's
in particular?
The one that the Teenage Cancer Trust recommend, and I think is very good. In fact, my son found it and recommended it to me. He found it independently. Is an app called Headspace, and that's by a guy called Andy Puddicombe. Yeah. And I think he was a Buddhist monk at one time in his life, and he's fantastic, and he's young and trendy, and relatively young and trendy. And I think you can have the Headspace for 10 days to see if you like it, free, before you need to pay for it. Yeah. Yes, so yeah, I would recommend Andy Puddicombe. I think after learning meditation, he then got testicular cancer. So he then had to walk his talk. He had to use everything he'd learned to help him through that experience. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, and there is a mindfulness in school project as well. So if you have a school that would like to learn mindfulness but doesn't have any teachers trained, the mindfulness in school project, it's called MISP on the internet. They'll give you support, and I think they'll even help fund teachers go through the training so they can come back into school and teach mindfulness to the kids. And also I think it's lovely for the teachers as well, help them cope with the stress.
I just want to say, brilliant talk, and it's great to hear it. I'm a physiotherapist, and I work with adults with chronic pain generally, but I have a daughter who's 3 who has Ollier's, so I'm sort of facing the situation of, things to do with adults aren't always the same to kids. But just to say, any adult I prefer for the mindfulness, with, they come to physio sometimes with an expectation that we can make things better, but a lot of the time with chronic pain, the initial tissue injury might have settled down. And I'm not speaking about all yours, I see people with like more orthopedic kind of osteoarthritis, a variety of things, chronic back pain. There's so many, it's just become so debilitating that pain cycle means they can't do the things they enjoy, so you're staying in more. It's just adding to the anxiety and depression of it all, and it's really difficult. And there's no amount of exercise that's going to make you feel better. What I have found, and whether it's useful for anybody here, and it's what I encourage my daughters, the mindfulness is really, really good just to focus down a little bit, and the movement is really good. And it doesn't mean a 10K. For some of my patients, it's getting into the pool with their kids.
Yeah.
They mightn't be able with their back to do much on land, and it's the psychological enjoyment that brings. They automatically say the pain is, it's certainly much more manageable on those days. So with my child, I don't know what physically lies in the future for her, but it's about finding something that you can enjoy, whatever it may be. As first, other my patients are sitting on the floor, throwing the ball back and forth with their kids because they haven't been able to do that. But certainly, that app, I've recommended it, and pain is just one of those complex things, but it's great that as a society we're looking at it more from a whole person perspective and not just pain is protective.
That whole environment actually, it's bigger than the person,
and
isn't
it's
it?
doing things you enjoy with people who add value to your life and you enjoy. And that's not going to cure your pain, but it's about managing it, because sometimes there isn't a cure. And I always say pain is protective. If you put your hand on something hot, you get pain because it's telling you do not leave your hand there. But what happens is that volume switch for pain sometimes stays stuck up at a level 10 where all you have to do is look at the kettle, and and it's about trying to get those things that turn down that switch. Medication has a role, but definitely this mindfulness, from my point of view and my experience with adults, and I'm sure I work with children too, I just don't have that experience.
I don't.
But I would just say the movement, doing things you enjoy, because sometimes sitting in the gym doing the exercise a physio tells you, so some physios give out me for that, but when it comes to chronic pain, I think it's about finding things that add value to your situation,
Yeah.
and bring it in with this, and that's just a comment I'd like to make about it, and it's just great to see society just looking at pain from a broader perspective when it comes to chronic pain, because it's very, very difficult for people.
I couldn't agree more.
And
Agree
the
with
most
everything
important
you
thing
said.
to say, it's not in your head. If you're
Yes.
going to this, it's not in
Yes.
your head. There's so much more to it, but it's finding there's so many things that can influence it, and it's targeting all of those things. Sometimes it's not about targeting the back, for instance. It could be the low mood, the anxiety about doing things, and just facilitating. So I work with a great team, and we have occupational therapy as well, who, looking at, and if you're finding your children or yourselves in a situation, try and get a team. Team involvement would be really, really